Recording.
Okay, great.
All
I'm going
right,
to share
Erin.
my screen. Okay, thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
So welcome everybody. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Erin O'Hanlon. I work in the Center for Community Engagement and Service Learning. We'll be talking a little bit about civic engagement, what that means and what that looks like. And I'd also like to give the opportunity to my colleague to introduce himself as well.
Okay, does that mean me?
That means you.
Okay, my name is Andy Colgill, and I'm the operations manager of a volunteer organization in Pleasantville, just outside of Atlantic City, called Eastern Service Workers Association. I'm one of the full-time volunteers.
Okay, so anybody who has any questions, feel free to go ahead and put it in the Q&A. That will come up for us and we'll see that. I'm gonna mute Andy just for a little bit while I talk, because he's got a busy office and he's got lots of people in there. And then I'll make sure that he gets unmuted once we're ready to go. And so we want to talk a little.
And I was also just going to quickly interrupt and let anybody who is watching us through our Facebook live stream know that if you have questions, we're also monitoring the chat through Facebook. So please feel free to comment any questions that you might have, and we'll make sure to ask them during our webinar today.
Okay, great. So what I really wanted to do was just take a minute to talk a little bit about civic engagement, what that means. We hear that a lot within in the Stockton community. And so really that can be a broad range of different things. So that can be everything from voting to getting politically engaged, to doing service learning, to doing volunteer work and activities. And so it's sort of an umbrella term for us. Anything that really impacts community and particularly impacts systems, we really consider civic engagement. So sometimes people will take civic engagement classes, or they might particularly study political engagement. So, you know, there's like civic engagement as the big umbrella, community engagement is within that as well. And then we look at like sort of political engagement and service learning underneath that umbrella. So I did want to, because Andy has been good enough to join us, I want to turn it over to him and just talk a little bit, have him talk a little bit about his organization, what that is, what type of work they do in the community, and what kind of volunteer opportunities that they have in the community as well, because it's important to know that Eastern Service Workers is very closely linked with our campus. It's not our only community partner, but it is certainly a primary community partner for us. And then we're going to talk about that in the context of civic engagement and how that works. So I'm going to unmute Andy. I think I'm going to ask him to unmute. And then give him an opportunity. I'll mute myself and give him an opportunity to talk a little bit.
Okay, great. I'm very new to the technology, so I apologize. Is there any way for us to have the folks that are listening in, like introduce themselves or ask any questions or anything like that?
I think because we're doing this webinar style, I think it's more that they're just, you know, getting the information. They do have the opportunity to drop Q&A questions. So
Cool.
if we see any Q&A questions, we'll definitely, you know, relay those.
Great, yeah, because I definitely want to tailor what I say to the interests of the folks that are listening. So as soon as you have something that you want me to say or go in a different direction, feel free to let us know by whatever means you have. So that being said, our organization is an organization of service workers, and service work is now the dominant form of work in the economy. 70–80% of the work. So especially in this area, South Jersey, with its resort-based economy, it means that the folks that are working in those casinos or in the hotel rooms, working in healthcare, in many cases, working in retail, working a lot of the new gig jobs that have emerged, are liable to be members of Eastern Service Workers. We have about 20,000 members built up over the last 43 years here in mostly in Atlantic County, but other parts of South Jersey. And the idea of having a self-help organization is that we have a lot of shared problems as low-income workers, people whose you know, schedules often mean a lot more than 40 hours a week, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs necessary just to try to keep one's head above water. And the fact that these problems are collectively experienced doesn't mean that things are getting better. In fact, things, you know, historically have gotten worse over the last 40 years for working people in general. This generation is now making, on average, $2,000 less than your parents' generation was, despite having, you know, significantly more education. There's, you know, 30% approximately of the U.S. population now has college degrees, 4% right after World War II. But you talk to people anecdotally, you'll find out that somebody was able to pay their rent with, you know, 2 or 3 days labor, and they pay their monthly rent. And nowadays, people are working through, you know, 3 weeks of work and still, you know, just barely making the rent for the month, which means they have 1 week of wages left to be able to pay off, you know, all their other bills. So we've got a very serious economic problem, but kind of a lack of awareness of the fact that conditions have gone down to such a degree, and also a lack of awareness that it's collective action and organization that is the key to being able to do something about that. So in order to do something, to start to change things on an immediate level, we formed a benefits program that has been functioning on a self-help nature now for 4 decades. So over time, it's gotten to have some fairly strong aspects to it. It includes 11 points, starting with very simple things like emergency food, clothing, but it's also come to include some more complicated aspects like preventive medical care through volunteer doctors and nurses. Aaron's mother, in fact, has been a participant as a volunteer nurse. Just donated a glucometer, you know, for us to use with patients just yesterday, actually, with a whole team of professionals, medical professionals. Volunteer dentists, we just got back. We just had a volunteer dentist earlier this afternoon donating care. We're going to do that again tomorrow. Legal assistance through volunteer attorneys. And because the benefits program is so extensive in some respects, you know, sometimes it can kind of get confused with a charity because so much of our time is devoted to providing services. But the essence of the organization is very different from that of a charity. Those are just a means to an end. We're really just trying to stabilize situations enough that more of those that are going through the conditions that necessitate the food, the clothing, and the other services can focus in on why are we suffering from these problems in the first place, and then hold accountable those institutions that could do so much more with all the resources that they have. So in other words, we have, you know, on a shoestring, the ability to accomplish a lot, and then it kind of points out, well, if you have all these resources, why is so little being done on behalf of those who need it the most? An example would be just this week, we got a call from a pensioner who's only getting about $850 a month. He's a homeowner. $300 immediately goes towards paying taxes. He's after a life of work as a service worker, as a prep cook in a restaurant. And he was calling us because the county had sent him to us. So the county government was sending somebody to us because Medicaid, was about to take $144 out of his measly income now that he's turning 65. And so he didn't know how he was going to survive with even less money, you know, than that $850. And so we had advocates, you know, spending most of a morning trying to assist him in his efforts to apply for a government program that would cancel that, exempt him from the necessity to have that $144 taken out of his check. So this is the kind of work that, as I mentioned, like goes on day to day. It's very hands-on, but it's essentially not a charity or a handout. It's a self-help approach. And so because we have done all this without any government funding, without any paid staff, it has given us over the years a high degree of independence. So since our founding back in the 70s, we've been very focused on some of those promises that would allow institutions of the government to do so much more on behalf of those least able to afford, you know, their own life, basically, in South Jersey here. So the sort of prime promise that we always point to is the fact that when casinos were legalized in South Jersey back in 1977, 76 was the referendum. 78 was when the first casino opened up. The casino, so-called Casino Control Act, and then the subsequent law that was passed that created, an agency that's supposed to use some of that money to assist with basic needs. They had, and I quote, they had an obligation to promote the health or social or economic well-being of the people. That's what a portion of the casino proceeds was supposed to be used for. Another phrase that they used was pressing social and economic needs. And we just, just to use a current example, just a couple weeks ago, we had to address with a group of 36 community members, Egg Harbor Township committee people, so the city level government, municipal government, to the fact that over the last 40 years since that initial law was passed, more than $2.2 billion has been spent, and only 1,500 housing units, affordable housing units, have been built with that. So you've had hundreds of millions of dollars that has been used instead for the Margaritaville Beach Bar and the facade on the Harrah's Convention Center, and as tax breaks for the Tanger outlets, and basically been given as gifts back to subsidize the casino corporations. And the place that money hasn't gone into is back to the community members that were promised that initially when the casinos were legalized back in the late 70s. So in that case, we were able to win over allies, even among hotel owners whose facilities people were being put out of, who all agreed that the state should be held accountable, people on the municipal level as well. And that's our basic approach to organizing, is to unite many of those on the bottom and work our way up to put more and more pressure on those at a higher level to expose when they don't keep their promises and hold them accountable, for the policies that haven't been followed through on behalf of the lowest paid workers in our community. So with all that comes a whole lot of opportunities for leadership training and organizing work. As I mentioned, I'm a full-time volunteer myself, so our structure is to not have any paid staff, to use our resources as efficiently as possible, plowing them right back into the work, and involving people on that account in every different aspect. So everything that we need, we reach out to local business owners, local professional offices to get donations, and so that becomes in itself another part of the organizing work. So at our office here in Pleasantville, which is right outside of Atlantic City, 20 minutes from the Galloway campus, maybe 10 minutes from the AC campus, we have opportunities 7 days a week, because we run from 9 in the morning till 9 at night, and even beyond those hours. And so we do everything through a method of on-the-job training, same way the old apprenticeship programs in the unions have worked for many years, where those that are brand new are paired up with those that have more experience, and you see something being done, then you can do it yourself, and then down the road you might even feel confident to be able to teach it to the next person. And by using that method, a lot of times the trainer will be like another student, for example, who maybe doesn't have a ton of experience, but they've done something a couple times themselves, so they feel confident enough to show somebody else how it's done. And so we, over the years, it's been a long and really fruitful partnership with Stockton. A lot of the student involvement starts with some of the really baseline hands-on stuff. So for example, last night I was working with I guess you would call it a pre-med student. She's a junior in biology who's planning to go in the medical field, and she came to the medical session, and so we had her working together with some of the volunteer nurses and doctors as a medical advocate, helping to do intakes with patients, find out what their medical history is, introduce them, kind of shuttle them around the session to the various medical professionals that were seeing the members. And she was paired up with other volunteers, because this was the first session, so she was learning as she went along. Another one of the volunteers is currently a medical student at Rowan, as it happens, but he was met originally when he was in the tutoring, one of the tutors at Stockton, and he was there in a slightly more advanced function, sort of helping directly. He was doing some of the blood sugar tests and things like that with the members. Oh, something just happened. Can you still see me? Okay.
Yeah, there you go. You're good.
Okay. So that's just one example. So likewise, with monthly dental sessions, last year, a pre-dental student was very involved in actually working as an advocate he got to know some of the volunteer dentists very well, and they actually gave him some training and explain each step that they were doing with the dental patients. We often do the same thing with folks that are interested in the law, have them work together with the volunteer attorneys as legal advocates. And then a good introduction to all that work is often to come on the canvases and participate in what we call our Canvas Captain training program, so that you begin to take on a kind of a leadership role within a certain neighborhood and get to know the residents as the teams are going house to house. That's the main way that people even become aware that there's an organization in their community that can do something about some of the problems that they're experiencing with nowadays society. People tend to be fairly atomized and don't know their neighbors. So the canvassing and recanvassing is really essential. And it's always a combination. Sometimes you're meeting people that, this is all brand new, and sometimes you're recontacting people who say, oh yeah, I went to your children's party back, 40 years ago when I was a kid, and I didn't know you were still around. And, so it's constantly this regeneration process of building organizations, very organic, and it helps tie people together. And by this means, we're able to often cut across a lot of the artificial barriers that kind of keep people separated. The neighborhood right around the Stockton AC campus is very there's not that many people that are getting very much government assistance. There's a lot of people working in a lot of jobs, but it's also very multilingual, multi-ethnic, and there tends to be not that much communication between the different languages and ethnicities. So our canvassing there has been really focused on trying to bring together all the different service workers within each different language group and ethnic group around the shared economic problems that we're all suffering from. We always say the only color we see is green because we don't have it and we need it. And towards building the ability, on the one hand, to deal with as many immediate problems as necessary. And this whole last 6 months has been a vastly expanded food distribution with a whole delivery route to adds up to about 100 households a week, because that's been a huge need. And then dealing with things like lack of ability to get unemployment, lack of housing resources, or people are getting very worried about what happens when the eviction or shut off for utility moratoriums end, because they're in many cases months behind. So we've been very focused on that hands-on work, like I just mentioned, but at the same time, through all of this, like teaching about the fact that if you just do like a back of an envelope calculation, about $1 billion is made in profits every year off of the casinos alone. And with less than 40,000 people in Atlantic City and a 40-year history of these, the casinos and this law being in place, if the money that was made by the workers here stayed in this area, everyone technically could be a millionaire. So you just see how that hasn't happened. The money's sort of been sucked out and it's gone up to Wall Street and so forth. And it helps explain why there's such a huge gap in income between a few billionaires and an increasingly struggling working population. So we try to focus in on that and provide education as well as the hands-on work.
Great, awesome. So we actually do have a question, Andy. Somebody asked, what's one of the common majors that work with you at Eastern Service Workers? Is there any limitation on majors that can come and work with you?
I'll answer the second question first. No, there's no limitation. We have a gamut. I mean, one of our new full-time organizers actually was a chemistry major. He just graduated. So, there's kind of no real connection between what he was studying and what he ended up doing. He was interested in becoming a teacher, and then he learned a lot about economic disparities and things like that through the canvassing. but oftentimes students are, as I mentioned, like in fields that are going to lead them into a helping profession, whether it be health sciences or things that are going to be, preparing them for pre-law or in social work. That's often, when we have a volunteer questionnaire and people fill it out, they often say that they're here to help people. That's kind of and in meeting Stockton students, typically 80% or more of a class will be focused in on some form of a helping profession. So
yeah, absolutely. We have lots of service professions here, right? Certainly all of the health science professions here are service professions. Yep. And as well as, some of the hospitality and tourism professions for sure. So
yeah.
another question we just got was, do people have to have particular skills when they come to work with you? Should they bring skills, or is it really an opportunity for, you to do some training with them?
Great question. They don't have to have any skills. We go from wherever somebody's at. However, they're welcome to share their skills. For example, a lot of folks will have a special interest in, we'll just take an example, like we're getting out our newest issue of our newspaper right now. So we had a recent graduate from Rice University down in Houston who also does some side work, freelancing work as a designer and a photographer. And she took most of the photos that are going into this issue. And she also taught herself InDesign quickly and then did a lot of the design work. And she taught actually some other volunteers as she was doing it, how to do the desktop publishing as we were producing the newspaper. So,
oh, that's great. So that's one of the opportunities that students have, is if they're interested in writing, even if they themselves aren't journalism majors, but they just like to write, they could come and do some writing work with you.
yeah, so basically any skill that somebody has, it's more than likely that we can find a use for it, and that they could share that skill, if they have an interest in trying to like put that to use, we're more than willing to do that. And then likewise, if somebody feels like they don't have any particular skills and they really don't know what they're doing except they can show up, we're really open to that too, because we always say that all it takes is two things: a desire to try to change things and a willingness to help. That's it.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much for that. Is there any last words? What's the best way for people to get in contact with the association, with ESWA?
You can always give us a call. We're open 7 days, like I said, daytimes and evenings, 609-646-9814. So 646-9814. You can come by our office. We're open, all those hours, 53 East Washington Avenue. That's in Pleasantville. Those are the main ways. My name is Andy Kogel. I'm the operations manager. And as for John, he's just graduated from Stockton College, John Sherfy. He's here evenings and weekends all the time.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for talking about the work that you do. I can attest that, who is somebody who has been in partnership with Eastern Service Workers for many years. They do extraordinary work. They do emergent work, which I think is really important and not typically the case, right? So a lot of social service agencies don't offer weekend hours, probably don't offer night hours. So I think one of the advantages that you guys offer is emergent work, and I have never found someone who has been turned away from Eastern Service Workers, either as a volunteer or as a member. And so, you will do your best to help them, even if that means you have to make some phone calls or, dig deep for some information. You will at least try to answer their information.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a tremendous help. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So Andy, if you want to stick around, you're welcome to. We'll see if any other questions come in, or if you're very busy, which I recognize. I'm just going to do a little bit of some more conversation here with some additional slides that I have. So one of the things I definitely wanted to talk about in terms of civic engagement, and we're going to use Eastern Service Workers sort of as the model of that, is civic engagement is something that any of us can do and all of us are responsible for. So it's both an idea, a practice. It's a way of getting educated as well, right? So, in the Center for Community Engagement and Service Learning, we're very invested in experiential learning, which means really hands-on. So civic engagement is a way of getting hands-on learning, but it's not any one thing. You can't say, oh, I'm civically engaged because I'm registered to vote. You can't say I'm civically engaged because I pay my taxes. You can't say I'm civically engaged because I volunteer. It's sort of all of those things collectively. It's sort of more of a mindset than anything else. The good news is we talked about Eastern Service Workers, right? Who they are, Eastern Service Workers Association, who they are, what they do, and what kind of volunteer opportunities they have. It's also important to recognize that Eastern Service Workers is in several other parts of the country as well. So they're part of a national movement focused on equity and parity, particularly around labor and economic disparity. So when we say economic disparity, we're really talking about the gap between what do the richest make and what are the poorest making, and why is there such a tremendous gap there? Okay, so in talking a little bit about this, anytime we talk about money, we have to talk about power. A lot of times we think of power as only one thing. We think of that there's only one pathway to power, and that's the traditional idea of power over, right? So parents have power and control, children don't have power, the government has power, people don't have power, the military has power, people don't have power. So that's the traditional idea of power over. But your generation really thinks differently about this. And so you focus much more, and particularly through things like protest, uprising, Black Lives Matter movement, other movements that are going on, you're thinking much more about power with others. And when I think about Eastern Service Workers, I really think about how they stand shoulder to shoulder in solidarity, in power with others. So they really think about sort of how can we help to meet people's immediate needs, but how can we also to help people in long-term needs too, not just individually on a micro level, but also in a macro level, and how do they influence systems as well. And I really saw that when I saw recently, as Andrew talked about, people who were living in hotels. These hotels, are where people live when they don't have stable housing, when they don't have lots of income. This was a place for them to live. It was a safe place for the most part, not always. Not always a healthy place, but it was a place for them. And the Egg Harbor Township government wrote for a grant from FEMA to be able to demolish those hotels. And their reasoning was that it was an area that highly flooded, and so it was needed, those hotels needed to be demolished. But what that did was took away some key housing. My biggest beef was that they did not put any services in place for that. And so they were taking away the housing, but not necessarily putting any kind of resources in place for the people. And that's where Eastern Service Workers stepped in to help to organize those communities and organize the people. So they really stood shoulder to shoulder to try to get their needs met. We also think a lot about power from within. And so we talk about, this is, about your choices, your value systems, and your ability to influence and take action, okay, based on your intention, clarity of vision, charisma, things like that, right? And we often underestimate that, particularly when we're in, let's say, our first year of college. We might not really recognize our power from within, but that's a really important skill, and it's a really important power that you have that you wouldn't necessarily recognize. And that's one of the things I think that Eastern Service Workers does really good, is help to empower their members in that way to recognize that power from within that they have. So when we talk about sort of the model that we operate from, we talk a lot about charity versus justice. So sometimes people will say, oh, well, I want to go and volunteer and I want to do community service, and and that for us is part of the charity model. So we really look at that as social service, which is, not a bad thing. I worked in social service for many years, so I recognize there's an important place for that. And so social service helps people, but it doesn't really help them enough to have economic mobility or to have social mobility. It gives them just enough to keep them surviving and existing, subsistence service, but not enough to really take them to the next level. And so what we like to see is that students maybe do some opportunities that are on this end of the spectrum to get themselves acclimated, but that ultimately they strive towards justice. So when we think about striving towards justice and social change, we're really thinking about how can we take action to impact our communities, right? The places that we live, the places that we work, the places that our families are, the places that are important to us, okay? And so that could be, community can be a physical place, but it can certainly be a collection of people, right? It could be a collective or a group of people that came together. By focusing on justice, we're really looking at institutions, structures. We're taking a look at root causes. What are some of the root causes that are connected to social problems? We're thinking about primary prevention, right? So we're thinking about what's the deeper underlying thing that's going on, and how can we not just put a Band-Aid on it and address it for today, but how can we really take an opportunity to make systemic change? And this is consistent with what we really see in your generation. Your generation is interested. You're not interested in just ending police brutality and ending deaths that happen to people of color by police officers. You're interested in changing the whole system. How do we decolonize police work? How do we decolonize our curriculum here at Stockton? So those are some of the conversations we're talking about, okay? So this is one of the quotes I really like to talk with people about. So, you've heard that quote, if you give me a fish, right? So if you give me a fish, you have fed me for a day. If you teach me to fish, then you have fed me until the river is contaminated or the shoreline is seized for development. But if you teach me to organize, then whatever the challenge I can join together with my peers, and we will fashion our solution. So you see the difference between, oh, well, people just need to know how to do things, right? It's charity is if you give me something and you fed me for the day. We're getting more on the justice end with the if you teach me, which is important, but what I really want to teach you is not just teach you how to fish. I want to teach you how to fish, and I want to teach you how to organize as well. I want to teach you that there are challenges. There's always going to be challenges. It can be rent control. It can be quality of education. It can be quality of fresh food. It can be your voter suppression, your ability to vote in an election. It can be fair wages, all of that, okay? So part of what we look at is, part of the way we engage with some of this is through service learning. And so service learning is one of the things that many students at Stockton engage in. It's not the only thing. We certainly work with community engagement in our center as well. But service learning is about experience and actively participating in some kind of a hands-on environment that teaches about real community needs. So this is why it's so important when we think about Eastern service workers and the fact that doing service with them is hands-on. It's skill building for you, and it's service to the community. You honestly leave the organization and the community better than you found it, okay? One of the things we always talk about is it can be an integration of what you're learning in the classroom and what you're learning in the community, right? Sometimes we see it's not an integration. There's a disconnect between what you learn in the classroom and what you learn in real life. And that creates a great opportunity for reflection. We really see that as not just like, well, wait a minute, I'm learning all this in the classroom, but then I go out and work with Eastern Service Workers or another organization, and I'm getting all this other experience or information. Okay, so we really like that because we want you to wrestle with that. We want you to talk about that. We want you to move away from the textbook or hegemonic sort of concept of things. We want you to recognize that sometimes things are complicated. Sometimes things are messy. Sometimes they go against every assumption or belief you've had before, and that's okay. Okay. So one of the things we look at is, again, following that whole idea of charity versus justice and campus-based versus community-based, you'll see here that we have sort of 4 different quadrants. So in quadrant 1, we look at really direct service opportunities. So this is things like feeding programs, clothing drives, road cleanups, tabling. That's all, you know, those are important things, and they're important baseline things, but they are also sort of very campus based, and they're very direct service based. We like to see first year students do things like that, with the caveat that by your 4th year, you will evolve into quadrant 4. So for quadrant 2, which is more like your sophomore year, we like to see people start to do individual advocacy. Eastern Service Workers is an opportunity where people can do individual advocacy. We like to see letter writing. We like to see donating. We like to see people think about fundraising opportunities. We also like to see people do things that are on a larger national scale. By your junior year, though, we like to see folks start to do near peer teaching experiences, right? So if you started in your 1st year at Eastern Service Workers, by your 3rd year, you might have the opportunity to then teach somebody else about something that works that way, or something, or a skill building that you would do there. We're always interested in legislative advocacy, campaigns, so campaigns for movement, but also informational and educational campaigns, in community-based resources and research, organizing special events, including workshops, including community coalitions. That's what we start to see. And then by your 4th year, we like to see things like you're leading on a lot of activities. You're developing policy briefs. You're using technology to develop community mapping. You're maybe producing websites or reports or writing legislation. You're collecting or canvassing for data. You're, doing some film screening and hosting a dialogue about it, right? So it's not just enough to have a film screen, but also then to be able to lead in a discussion about it. So this is kind of our developmental model of what we like to see. So this fits within the whole idea of, we want to make it real, we want to make it relevant, and we want to make an impact. And so when we think about your service opportunities, when we think about your civic engagement, we really like to sort of follow these steps. What kind of real problems do you care about? What kind of real problems are things that you have seen happen and you're like, that's not right? What is it that you're passionate about? What are some of the things that really matter to you and to your community? And who can you partner with to do some of that, to do some of those things with? Okay. So my only question as we start to take questions is, how do you plan on getting involved? What are some of the things that you hope to do on campus, off campus, developmentally throughout your time at Stockton, to really get involved and to put your civic engagement into practice? Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. I'm hoping we'll have some of our participants send us an answer to that. How do you plan on getting involved? Anybody, I think, can chat in the Q&A. It doesn't have to be a question. It can be a statement too. You can also comment in the chat.
I'll start and ask a question.
Okay.
Aside from the Eastern Service Workers, can you highlight some of the other organizations that Stockton students commonly work with in our community?
Yeah, absolutely. So not only can I highlight that, but I can actually jump on our Community Partner Finder app and screen share that a little bit. So hold on one second. So here is our Community Partner Finder app, and you'd be able to find this on our main website. And we have over 200 community partners that we work really closely with. So I'm going to click here to find a community partner. You know, for a long time when we built this, we had, you know, do you have transportation? Yes, I have transportation, or no, I don't. And we help to direct you towards a community partner. Now, of course, in the age of COVID, we've added a third category, which is actually I'm looking for a virtual project. So let me just assume for a minute that folks have reliable transportation. And let's say you have the option to look at this by location. So you could click on here and it would give you a map, and you could find community partners by location, or you can find community partners by issues. So I'm going to click on by issues. And then this is how we have our community partners organized. So we have them organized by issues, veterans, arts and humanities, income inequality, civic engagement, animals, older adults. These are all different organizations you can work with. So I'm going to click on, since we were talking about Eastern Service Workers, income inequality. And this will take us to these cards, and on each of these cards is a different organization which works with people who have experienced income inequality. So if we go down here a little bit, here's Eastern Service Workers, okay, and here's the detail on their cards. Here's Andy's name, here's their phone number, and then here's a little description about some of what they do. Okay, and we have them listed as an off-campus partner because of course you need transportation to get to them, right? So I'm going to go back further. And as you can see here, we have this organized by all different issues: LGBT community, women, children, environmental justice, schools, working with immigrants, all of that, okay? So if I go back even further and I look at virtual projects, I can click on two different options once I go into virtual projects. If I am primarily working at home or don't feel like I'm ready to go out into the community and work directly, I can click on local community partners with virtual learning projects. And this will give me these same organizations, but only the ones who have answered that they have virtual project opportunities. So for example, if we look at Contact Cape Atlantic, you'll see here all their information is the same, how to contact them, who's their leadership, and then here, right under their initial contact information, we have virtual service learning opportunities. And so it sort of lists some of the different things that they are in particular working on. So you could call up their office, talk to their leadership, and say, hey, I heard you're interested in you have some virtual opportunities. I'm calling from Stockton University. I'm a student, and I want to know how I can serve with you. Okay, so we have everything from the Salvation Army, South Jersey AIDS, South Jersey Horse Rescue, who is still taking volunteers in person, by the way, Save Barnegat Bay, Atlantic City Arts Foundation. So we have a nice collection. Not every community partner that we've worked with is necessarily offering virtual volunteer service opportunities, but there are lots who are. So some of them are Zooming. 4-H, for example, is doing some different opportunities where they're Zooming with their youth and their leadership youth and being able to build some of that. They work really closely with us, so they'd be happy to have that. Boys and Girls Club of Atlantic City, they have a tutoring program, okay? And so that's some of our virtual opportunities. Now, I would be remiss if I did not show you my own website connected to the Center for Community Engagement and Service Learning. And we have several programs as well that we completely run and facilitate. So one of those is the Virtual Homework Completion Program. We have Stockton students who tutor youth, community youth, Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. to 11:30, and then 3 to 5 p.m. So if you have youth in your life who are needing to be tutored, there's no restriction geographically. Anybody can benefit from this. All they have to do is sign up. So their parents can come here and click here to register a child. They can register that child, and then they can zoom in during these time periods, and they'll get matched with a tutor to be able to have their homework looked at, to be able to screen share and explain what their homework is. Maybe they need some additional information. I know I was helping somebody with some of this yesterday, and the child just was really lost with Google Classroom, didn't know where to find the homework in Google Classroom, and so I was able to show him that. But some of his math, quite honestly, was beyond me. So that's an opportunity. If that's something you want to do, you would go down to this green button here and you click Virtual Homework Completion Program, where you want to be able to volunteer for that. Okay. The other thing that it's important to recognize is that under the tab that I work most closely with, we also train and facilitate Bonner leaders. And so tomorrow is the deadline for the application for Bonner leaders. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can go here, find out more about it. What is the Bonner Foundation, and what is a Bonner leader? How do you become a Bonner leader? And that's kind of an honor society, let's say, a leadership development program of people who work in service. The Bonner leaders are really service advocates and social justice advocates who work on progressively larger projects, progressively more comprehensive or capacity building projects as they develop forward. Okay. So
Erin, can you put the links for those in the chat, and then this way I'll also share it on Facebook?
Sure will.
Thank you.
We put those in right now. So here is our website, and then I'll also put the Community Partner Finder link there.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah. All right, give me 1 minute while I do that.
Are there any other questions from our attendees today? Feel free to put those in the chat or the Q&A.
Okay, I put those links in there. I'd love to hear from other folks if they have questions about anything that we worked on. How, obviously Eastern Service Workers is just one of our over 200 community partners, but they are ones that really illustrate sort of our philosophy out of the Center for Community Engagement and Service Learning. I'm going to put my contact information in as well in case people have additional questions. I'd love to hear from some of our participants what their majors are. Okay. Lauren, anything else that I can help you with?
No,
Any other questions?
This provided a great overview. I think we answered all the questions that came in today. Just as a reminder for our participants to definitely check out the websites that Erin shared with us today. And also, even though the Get Involved Fair has wrapped up for the fall, you can get involved at any time during the semester. So there are several other organizations on campus that kind of complement the work that your office is doing. And so if you would like to be involved with a community service focused organization, we have plenty of those, some that focus specifically on environmental issues. All of our fraternities and sororities have their own philanthropies that they focus on. We have Meet the Greeks tonight from 7 to 10, and that's on Osprey Hub, run very similarly to how the Get Involved Fair was run. And so we encourage you to continue throughout the semester to, search on Osprey Hub, find an opportunity that's a good fit for you, and to get involved, whether that's with a student organization, a community service or civic engagement project on or off campus, but get involved with something so that you can really make the most of your college experience.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, so as we wrap up, thank you so much again, Erin, for helping to lead this session today. And Erin's information is in the chat. I'll make sure that I share that in the Facebook comments as well. And if you have any questions or follow-up, definitely reach out to Erin. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Erin.
All right, thank you.